Hi everyone, thanks for joining me. Today we're going to talk about dehydrating food at home. Specifically, what food dehydrators are worth spending your money on. This is a question I see a lot. So, first I'm going to talk about some specific features I think you should look for, and then I'm going to tell you if I had my druthers, if I could buy any machine, which one I would buy, and I think it might surprise you. But before we get to talking about electric food dehydrators, I want to talk about two other options. One is solar dehydration. So this was the way it was originally done, right? Why shouldn't you do it that way? Well, maybe you should. If you live in an area that's pretty arid or has time periods where it's nice and dry and hot, then solar food dehydration might be just the thing for you, especially if you're not doing dehydrating all year long. My dad used to tell stories about his granny who still in those days in the 30s and 40s wore long Victorian dresses and made lye soap, and she would cut up apples in big thick slices and lay them out on a sheet in the sun, and it worked beautifully, and my dad had great memories of that. If you want to do that, by all means do. For us, it doesn't work very well because where we live, there's too much humidity and moisture, and especially with the quantity of food that I dehydrate, it just wouldn't be very practical. So again, that can be as simple as laying out a clean sheet in the sun and turning over the food, or you can use a basket that hangs, on your porch somewhere that gets sun, or you can build a solar dehydrator. I have not done the building of a solar dehydrator, nor have I used the baskets that hang, so I can't really offer you advice about that, but the internet is full of options that way. Another option is to use your oven. Now this is pretty good if you only do a little bit of dehydrating. The problem with it is that your oven tends to be too hot to get a really good quality end product. So what I recommend is that you turn your oven to its very lowest setting and you open the door a crack and keep it that way. Then you're going to put a baking sheet down, and on top of the baking sheet you're going to put a wire cooling rack. And then you can put your food on top of that wire cooling rack. And that's going to get some good air circulation going. A better option is if your oven has a warming drawer. Before I got my electric food dehydrators, I used to do it this way. Again, you're just going to use that warming drawer on its lowest setting, and the baking tray and the cooling rack, and then your food on top of that. Those are pretty good options, especially if you're not sure, is my family going to like the stuff I dehydrate? I don't know. That's how I started out. But if you've decided that you need an electric food dehydrator, there are a few things you want to look for. The most important is a thermostat control. There are some inexpensive models out there that don't have a thermostat control. And I always tell people, wait. Don't buy that. Hold out for one that has temperature control because it's going to greatly increase the quality of your product. Why spend the time and the money on electricity and a machine to do the job to only end up with something that's not as good as it could be? So look for that, and ideally it's going to go from about 95 degrees all the way up to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. The lowest number, that's for herbs mostly. The higher number is for jerky. But even if you aren't doing those two things, I recommend you go ahead and find a dehydrator that has those temperatures and everything in between. And the reason for that is it shows quality. It shows that the manufacturer understands dehydrating and how to do it well. And also you may find that over time you may decide you want to do herbs or jerky. So it's just good. Spend the money now. It's not going to cost you much more to have a good quality dehydrator. The next thing you really need is a heating element that's enclosed and it's on the top of the machine, not the bottom. The reason you don't want it on the bottom is that sometimes food is going to drip and sticky stuff will get on there and it's hard to wash off without ruining the motor, and it's just going to be problematic. So a good quality food dehydrator has it on top of the machine. Also, that you need a fan or a blower for that heating element. Another thing to look for is double wall construction. So I don't have a great camera that shows me what you guys are seeing right now, but I'll try to show you and hopefully it'll be in focus. You see how this dehydrator tray has 2 walls. 1, 2. That's what you're looking for. All the trays should be like that. And again, this just makes it more efficient and just makes the machine work better. Finally, you should look for a UL seal of approval. That should be on any machine that's worth buying. That's going to show you that it's safety approved and efficient. So, okay, so those are the things that at least most people wouldn't disagree with me on, but this is the internet, so somebody will disagree. Now I'm going to kind of get into some things that probably more people will disagree with me on, but this is coming from all my years of experience using electric food dehydrators. I've probably been using an electric food dehydrator for about 14 years, so these are my preferences. So I like to be able to add or subtract trays. So back when my kids were little and I'd buy bananas and maybe they were about to go bad, I would slice them up and throw them in the food dehydrator, right? But it would only require maybe 3 or 4 trays. So with a food dehydrator, I like to be able to only run 3 or 4 trays if that's all I have food for, rather than being less efficient and using a bunch of trays that are empty. So you do want to look at your manufacturer's instructions, because usually there's a minimum number of trays that you should run. And that's so that your motor doesn't get too hot and basically blow up. Not literally blow up, but stop working because it overheats. I think these are 3 or 4 trays. I don't know, because I don't really do a lot of small loads these days. In addition, I can use as many trays as I want. So I can go a few trays more than this, and I do when our orchard is in full swing. So I like that flexibility of being more efficient, using fewer trays when that's all I have food for. But the downside to a dehydrator, a lot of people feel, that has flexible number of trays that you can use, is that you have to rotate the trays. So I only do this once or twice a day. In the morning, I'll come out here and I'll put the tray that's on the top, on the bottom, and so on and so on and so on. And then if the food is still not dry by evening, I'll do the same thing. To me, it's not a big deal. To some people, it's a really big deal. So it just depends on you. So this is where we get to the part where even more people are going to disagree with me. And the part I think you might find a little surprising if you've been looking into dehydrators. If I had an unlimited budget and I could buy any food dehydrator I wanted, I would still have these relatively inexpensive ones. So these are Nesco American Harvest. You can see I have some herbs drying in there right now, and I turned off the motor for the video, but it has the temperature control here, and this is the heat source, and these trays just stack on top of each other. And some people are surprised by this because, number one, it is relatively inexpensive. I didn't start out with 2, I started out with 1, and I started out with only the minimal number of trays it came with. I can't recall what that is exactly. But over the years, I added trays. You can do that. And I bought a second one when we moved to this homestead for our fruit orchard because it's so hard to keep up with the fruit. Even with, canning and using the freeze dryer and using the dehydrators. So a lot of people are like, what? You don't love Excalibur? That's like the food dehydrator everybody wants, right? Well, my mom-in-law has one, and you know what? It doesn't do any better of a job than this thing does, and it's a whole lot more expensive. I feel the same way about the Cabela's brand, which a lot of people rave over. if it's actually better, then yeah, it's worth spending more money on. But I personally don't feel like it's better. I've had these one of them ever since I started food dehydrating. And, I run these things like crazy. They're workhorses. They go from spring until late fall. They're almost every day full of food. And they keep going. So that's my recommendation. I also want to talk about add-ons. So as I said, I have bought extra trays for this, and I recommend that if your dehydrating habit warrants that. But you can also get a fruit roll cover for the trays. I should have brought one up, but I didn't think about it. But it's just a solid piece of plastic that covers this tray. It just sits right on top. And those are really good if you like to do fruit leather, or if you're doing liquids. Like I've done broth sometimes, dehydrated it. And I also would use it for like blueberries that would fall through these cracks otherwise. Or you can also buy a finer mesh that sits on top. For me personally, I don't like that. I don't need it. I don't feel. If I have herbs with little leaves, I just leave them on the stem while they're drying. And then once they're dried, I pick up one end of the stem and I go like this into the bowl or into the jar or whatever I'm putting it into, and that works great for me. But even if, when you're first starting out and you just have the holy trays, the holy trays, ha ha ha, you can just take a piece of parchment paper and put it on top. Admittedly, you want to leave this center hole open, but it's not too big of a deal to cut that open. And you can use that instead of a fruit roll thingamababa. I think that's it. So I encourage you to try food dehydrating if you haven't. It's a very easy method of food preservation. And if you go to my blog, which I'll put down here and also in the comments, you will find lots of articles about how to dehydrate food and, make cool things like celery salt and so forth with your dehydrated products. There's also lots of articles about canning and freeze drying and salting and some other methods of food preservation, plus lots of other homesteady stuff. So I hope you'll check it out. And as always, because, I'm on YouTube, so I have to say this apparently, because everybody does, like, share, comment. All right, thanks guys. Bye.